up and get out. Get rid of that frown that's been dragging you down and get up in the air. Just pretend that you can fly. You'll never know if you can till you try.
Hi, and welcome to Cannabis Helps Dementia. I'm Chella.
I'm Dave. And right up front, we'd like to say we're not doctors or medical professionals, and nothing you hear in this podcast should be considered medical advice.
Right.
We're not experts, but throughout this podcast series, you'll hear from doctors, nurses, research scientists, administrators, other caregivers, and people living with dementia about how cannabis helps.
Like it did for our family.
That's right.
After my mom was diagnosed with dementia, we were thrust into family caregiving and became fierce advocates for people living with dementia,
Including their access to cannabis medicine.
In this episode, we're talking with registered nurse Keebra Smith-Bolden, who created CannaHealth, the first and only Connecticut cannabis business owned by an African American.
Nurse Keebra began her career 22 years ago as a CNA specializing in home care. She's now an exceedingly skillful RN who has always had a passion for her community and held the highest standard of care for her patients.
Nurse Keebra leveraged her medical knowledge and decades of professional experience to create CannaHealth. Its innovative, community-based business model offers disadvantaged communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs education about how cannabis is medicinal, as well as safe and legal access through medical marijuana program evaluations.
Referred to as the marijuana guru in Connecticut, Keebra has taken the state's cannabis industry by force. She's a member of numerous industry organizations, including the Connecticut Coalition to Regulate Marijuana, Connecticut NORML, Women Grow, the Minority Cannabis Business Association, whose mission it is to create equal access and economic empowerment for cannabis businesses, their patients, and the communities most affected by the war on drugs. And in 2019, Keebra was named Connecticut Activist of the Year.
Keebra Smith-Bolden is an expert. Her work as a hospice and psychiatric home care nurse specializing in patients with mental health issues is how we learned about her. And she took care of her grandma after she had an aneurysm.
Keebra Smith-Bolden, thank you so much for joining us for Cannabis Helps Dementia.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Of course. Yes, thank you. It's such a dynamic time in the world, so we really are glad that we could connect. When you were a young nursing student, you came to recognize cannabis as medicine because of your grandma's experience. Could you tell us how that unfolded?
Yes, so I was already a nurse, but I was in the process, I think at the time of going. So I've gone through every step possible in in healthcare and nursing in particular. I was a certified nursing assistant, a licensed practical nurse, and then became a registered nurse. And I'm now working on my degree as a family nurse practitioner. But at the time, I think I might have just gotten my RN, and my grandmother had an aneurysm. And it devastated her mind and her body. And now this wasn't the average 88-year-old. Like, my grandmother was a fly lady with a boyfriend who drove a car, was still very active in the community. As a matter of fact, when she had her aneurysm, she was at doing a little speech that she did when people passed away for a group that she was in. So, she was in the work of community, and it devastated her mind and body. She ended up being unable to come home to live alone. So she came to live with me. We had to care for her. And I'm thinking, I'm a nurse, I could do this. And, my family would be involved. But it was so overwhelmingly hard to care for someone, especially because this was a very independent woman, and she had become wheelchair bound, wasn't eating, wasn't engaging with the family, unable to care for herself in any way. And it just was, emotionally difficult and as well as physically difficult to manage her care. And so, but I'm a home care nurse, so I got home care services in, and one of them was physical therapy, which I felt was very important because one thing, she would fall a lot. And so we wanted her to engage in physical therapy, and she just wouldn't. And it seemed so bizarre to me that this woman who had all this independence would not want to get better, would not want to participate. And so I'm a praying girl. And so, I prayed and I asked God, like, help me help my grandmother, because therapy was going to discharge her. Because, if you fail to show any improvements in Medicare, they discharge you. And so, like that in my prayer, it came to me that my grandmother had told me 10 years before, maybe, that she had to smoke a joint and take a bath to get her body moving because she had severe arthritis throughout. And she had a lot of allergies, so she couldn't take a lot of traditional pain meds. And so I was like, okay, that's it. We'll get grandma high. I didn't know, what exactly that consisted of or how we were gonna do it, but everything kind of came together. She had a caregiver, and they did their thing in the morning. I really didn't know, how things were happening.
Was it inhaled?
It was inhaled.
Okay.
And so now, with my knowledge that I have, I would discourage anyone with an aneurysm who is to use any type of substance that they have to inhale or smoke, because the coughing could displace whatever has been put in place to stop the aneurysm. And so but at the time I didn't know any better. And luckily my grandmother was okay. Right. But within a month, my grandmother began walking with the walker, was engaging with the family, was laughing, was eating, was able to like, her friends would come. It was just such a quick turnaround, like 4 weeks. And I was like, after being a nurse for, I think at this point, over a decade, I really had never seen this type of improvement. I had been giving pills to people every day, and maybe they stayed stable, but many people experience exacerbation of both their chronic illness and their mental illness, even being on these meds every single day. And
that was our experience with Chella's mom.
Yes. And it's so many people's experience, they never seem to get better. They're just taking more pills and adding more things. And so because of how cannabis totally did a turnaround in her, I wanted to study this, and I wanted to be able to offer it to my patients as an option and offer it to my community as an option. So I found a school in Massachusetts, the Northeast Institute of Cannabis, and I took their course. It was a 12 class course of study to become competent in cannabis. And yes, the science of cannabis and learning about the endocannabinoid systems and how cannabinoids and terpenes work together to heal the body. But I also got really engaged when we started talking about the history of cannabis prohibition and the communities that were most affected by prohibition and how that led to the destruction of so many communities. And so I wanted to not only educate my community from a medical standpoint and provide this as an alternative to traditional pharmaceuticals, but I also wanted to engage people of color, poor people from inner city communities in this now billion-dollar industry, so that they could potentially be able to recover from the damage that the war on drugs did to those communities. Even if people don't want to actually be in the cannabis industry or do something touching the plant or whatever, like, you can also benefit because money coming in should go to those communities that were over policed. Right. And so that was I was immediately like in love with this plant, with what it meant, what it could do, but also how it could change my community, how it could open my community's eyes to the wrongs that have been done and the fact that they suffer from urban trauma. And this is from, birth to death, a lot of people, and they never get it acknowledged. And so I was able to do that at the same time as bringing cannabis as medicine to the inner city in a different way. Because, in the inner city, they have weed, people smoke, but it's not, and I do believe that almost everyone consumes cannabis medicinally.
Right. That's what we believe.
Yeah.
We have some of the hardest people to convince of that are recreational users.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is, when you really show people how cannabis works in the body and what it is, like, you're stressed, you're feeling anxiety, you smoke a blunt, that is medicating yourself. That's right. And kind of showing people that, and so that has been really, really rewarding to get people to think about consuming cannabis in a different way, to be able to use cannabis as social justice, to create equal opportunities for people in our community from 8 to 80 has just been amazing. And I'm thankful to be on this path.
How is that dynamic we heard that that is a center of your practice, is helping people that have been victims of, or affected by the war on drugs through PTSD, which is one of the approved conditions on the list of tyranny in Connecticut. And so I find that very interesting. I'd like to expand on that, as well as how do you bridge that stigma? How do you break that stigma? And is it a stigma in the, say, older African American community, which is sort of the focus of our podcast, with issues of dementia? Because we also notice that dementia and Alzheimer's are not on that list in Connecticut.
Exactly.
So maybe you could talk about a couple of your patients, or how do you deal with that? Getting around what's on the list, how to get cannabis medicine to people who need it, who have dementia, and how do you use it in that regard?
You might have to remind me of parts of those.
Sure.
The 3 questions rolled into one.
Yes. So the first part was PTSD and urban trauma.
Yes.
So at CannaHealth, where we help people get their medical cannabis cards in the state of Connecticut, I provide APRNs who actually certify people. So we give make cards. But as you said, one of the qualifying conditions is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And we administer an assessment for post-traumatic stress disorder called the PCL-5. It's a nationally recognized assessment tool that many practitioners, specifically the Veterans Association, uses to determine PTSD and trauma if you're a trauma victim. But what we are finding in inner city urban communities, that there's not just one trauma. So when we do this assessment, it's made up of 3 different parts. The first part is you check off if you've experienced something, witnessed something, it happened because of your job or whatever. And it goes through a list of different experiences, from rape to murder to homicide to suicide to domestic violence to car accidents to war to many different natural disasters. And what we're finding in urban communities is that they're not just checking off 1 or 2, but they're literally checking off almost every box as an experience that they've had throughout their lives. So many people come to CannaHealth, and probably a lot of other places, and they're like, oh, what do I have to say to get a card? And usually if you're Black or brown or from an inner city community, all you got to do is say the truth, because they don't realize it until they start enumerating it. So I'm able to now take these people who have been this is learned behavior. They've learned to deal and cope with this trauma as if it's every day, and that's the way it's supposed to be. So now I'm pointing out, no, you are a trauma victim, and you have these symptoms that you're attempting to manage with cannabis because of the traumas you've experienced. Now, we can continue to manage these symptoms, and I'm all for you managing them with cannabis. But what's really important that I make sure that I do is refer these people now to counseling and therapy, because they'll always have to be combating these symptoms until they begin the healing process from these traumas. So I remember the next question. So the difficulty still lies within many people in our communities, especially our older members of our community, because number one, the propaganda that went out against this plant was for real. Like, they really stop, just put stuff out there, no truth to it.
Criminal.
Science disproved many of the things that they were saying. They ignored science. Sounds a little bit like our current government.
Yeah.
And so these people believed, why would the president say it if it's not true? Why would, Congress do this? And so they believe these lies, and they've been perpetuated in our communities for years and years and years. And, it's unfortunate, but that's something that we have to combat. The other end of that is that, grandmas and moms from the inner city community, their grandsons and sons went to prison behind this. So the last thing they want to do is touch this plant, have, problems, get kicked out of housing, all these things. So, if it's not one thing, you know, the stigma, is the other, the reality that, you know, consuming this plant can make you a criminal and ruin your life and ruin the lives of the people you love. So we have to acknowledge that truth, because it's the truth. But we also have to show people that because we have a medical program, there's a way to legally do this. You carry your card, you know, you keep, and you know, that generally with knowledge and education, and also letting these little old ladies know you don't got to smoke a joint, you don't have to roll a blunt, you know, you could actually have arthritic knees and just rub some cannabis CBD infused salve on that knee, and you'll be just you'll get the relief that you need, you know. That's a possibility. So a lot of times that's just what I do. You know, I just rub stuff. I'm rubbing little old ladies' knees all the time. And I'm like, just see how that feels. And then they come
Pass
back.
the cream around. Where does it hurt?
Exactly.
Put it on there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then that is the greatest gift that we have, is word of mouth with this plant. You know, so if I give somebody the greatest pain relief in their left knee with the salve that I rubbed on them, and they take a little and give it to their friend and their friend, you know, eventually we're getting the word out that way. And then of course, just really just educating. You know, I had a 94-year-old woman come to me who needed bilateral knee replacement surgery. They had prescribed her OxyContin or oxycodone for pain, and she was terrified to even try it, because she was like, oh, all I hear about is the opioid crisis, and I don't want to be addicted. I don't want to be, you know. And so instead, her option in her mind was that she had to be in pain until her daughter told her to consider an alternative. And so she called us. We were able to get her card, and she said, I'll never ever smoke it, but I will use tincture. I will, you know, use salves and lotions and creams. And so, you know, that's where we're making a difference, because you know, they're not wrong to be afraid.
No, not at all.
It is very addictive, especially if you are in a lot of pain and need that medication. After 2 weeks, you're addicted.
Yep.
You know,
and they're not wrong about the war on drugs affecting their grandkids still too. It's
exactly.
You know, yeah.
You know, and so in our communities and communities of color and poor, and I always say poor communities too, because there are people in the struggle who get treated just like we do, who are not Black and brown. I definitely understand that, because economic disenfranchisement is the same as all the social and class ails that, you know, things that ail our community. But you know,
there was some direct targeting going on from Nixon on.
Oh, absolutely.
And before, but definitely.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the statistics don't lie.
Right.
But you know, when we really like part of what we do with getting people their cards in at CannaHealth is we save people who are on probation and parole. You know, now they have a card, they can't be violated. So, you know, with education, with really helping people understand how to work the system that is basically trying to work against you, but getting what you need. And this is plant-based natural medicine. So, you know,
still hasn't killed anybody.
No. And pointing out the hypocrisy of the United States. You know, it's Schedule 1 drug, yet they have a patent on it. Like, so like I point that out. I always say, I tell people when I go talk at churches and community events, look up US patent number 6630507. And they're like, oh, okay, yes, because it's right there. It's plain as the day.
Neuroprotectant.
Yeah, B1 is a neuroprotectant.
Absolutely.
And so tell us about maybe one or two of your patients living with dementia. How has cannabis therapeutics improved their quality of life, and what are they using?
So honestly, I have not officially medicated anyone with dementia because I haven't had the ability to certify, but 1 or 2 dementia patients. And the issue is that in the state of Connecticut, if someone is receiving Medicare or in a nursing home or in a where state funds are coming in, it's illegal for them to consume, for them to store any type of cannabis-based products. So the people who need it the most, you know, who can't make this choice, live elsewhere or whatever, aren't getting access to it. But science is showing that cannabis, and specifically THC, is closing or reducing the size of plaque in the brains of people with Alzheimer's and dementia. And so it is an effective drug, medicine, obviously. And so getting those laws changed, and that's something that I'm working on to the extent that I can, with educating nursing homes. I'm a nurse. I work in nursing homes. So, you know, having this conversation, which I would have been deathly afraid of 4 years ago, but now I can boldly say, because not only do I believe what I'm saying, but I have the science to back me up. You know, I know that I'm saying I'm on the side of good. And so, you know, we are seeing, I have had a few patients who are using CBD, and it has been really improved, reduced their anxiety, help with the withdrawal and the depression that comes with Alzheimer's and dementia. And so we've seen some real reductions there.
So you have a function, well, CBD, of course, technically legal everywhere. We're certainly finding on our interviews that CBD is definitely beneficial and an entry level for many people, especially in the states where you don't have specific conditions on the list, like in Connecticut, where Alzheimer's and dementia. You have other neurological conditions on the list. You have Parkinson's, you have MS, you have other, you know, and chronic pain, I believe, was just recently added. So obviously that list can be expanded. We call them the lists of tyranny throughout the country. So, and we were speaking to Melanie Bone last week about how in Florida, they have to find creative ways and actually write letters, you know, because they have pain on the list, but it has to be from a condition that's on their list, like cancer or something. Or like, for instance, I've noticed in Connecticut, you have terminal disease that requires end-of-life care. Well, that Alzheimer's is definitely a terminal disease, but does that mean it's just in hospice? Well, that would affect. In California, we have a state program where private residential care facility, they can create a program that uses full
assisted
THC.
living.
Assisted livings, right?
Not nursing homes.
Not nursing homes, right?
Anybody who gets Medicare money cannot go anywhere near it and won't. Yeah. We'll throw you out over it.
Even in Florida, it's like their memory care, only CBD. That's it. They can't use the other part.
I'm finding the same thing. At assisted living facilities, though, there is that flexibility, like you said, because of the fact that most of the people are privately paying. They're not, you know, dependent on Medicare unless, and it's still not a dependent thing, but, you know, unless they have a illness, exacerbation of an illness, or have to go to the hospital, and then they receive the Medicare funds. But for the most part, those people are choosing to try cannabis. We go into assisted living facilities and certify people, especially if they have difficulty with mobility, like a Parkinson's. Well, I'm thinking of one patient in particular with Parkinson's. And we went in and certified. So they are beginning to have those conversations and be more open to that in assisted living facilities. So, and then maybe if we can get people on regimens at that stage before they go into, you know, because a lot of people decline and end up in the memory care unit. So, you know, if the facility is beginning to be open to the idea, maybe by the time that they're dependent on the facility for their medication, it could still be kept in their regimen for the good of them.
Yeah, for the good of them, indeed. I mean, the glacial pace is so frustrating. I mean, you saw with your grandma, I know it was sort of outside the bounds of what you would do now, but you saw with your grandma tremendous benefit.
So the way it works is a little different here. And I guess it's kind of similar in California, but our dispensaries are all run by pharmacists. So we have a
no, that's different.
Yeah, we have a pharmaceutical model. So we we refer someone and say that they are eligible for cannabis, but we don't necessarily make recommendations once they get their card. The pharmacist does that at this juncture. So people come back to us. You know, we do make some general recommendations during the visit, but our dispensary system is so
so the same
They
guy
all
that's
have
the same
a lot of work to do, really.
yeah, and they don't have a lot of options. So you never know what the dispensaries are going to have. So it would be really hard for us to make specific recommendations.
Right.
We just like general. So like I would say, try a hybrid,
Right.
you know, do a CBD, THC 1-to-1, you know, that kind of thing. I do make those general recommendations, but the majority is done by the pharmacist in the dispensary based on the person's diagnosis and their medical history they share with them.
and what they've got in their stash. What is it the same guy that dispenses the Vicodin? Is that the same pharmacist, or is this a different special pharmacist that's been trained?
Nope, the same pharmacist.
Same dude.
But I will say that most of the pharmacists are also advocates and really believe in the Connecticut program.
Did they get special training? Are they required to get the kind of training you got with regards to the endocannabinoid system or anything like that?
Wow.
No.
So they're just looking it up on Leafly and trying to figure out what to do.
Wow.
Well, and they're looking at the limited options that we have
right
on our list, and then making recommendations from there. Yeah.
Do you have edibles in Connecticut, like gummies?
We do have edibles.
Yeah. Yeah, so every state is a little different. You know, I mean, it took a year for Florida to get smoked cannabis on their medical list, and New Jersey only has smoked cannabis.
Right.
And New York's system is hellacious. Our system was basically going great until it got destroyed by Prop 64. Great for patients anyway, and decriminalization. We had pretty much decriminalized it in California.
Although we didn't have the breakdown of what was in it.
Right.
It would have been nice to have a little more regulation as far as like testing and things like that, but not 35% taxes.
Yeah, I know. Now we test it like plutonium out here, and we handle it like plutonium in California. You can't put strawberries in edibles because the strawberries come back hot. Because you can eat strawberries covered in pesticide in California, but you can't eat them if they're in the edible. So it's crazy. Yeah, it's nuts. Every system is crazy.
So I know that you have a background in hospice care, right? Have you found that cannabis benefits people in hospice?
Absolutely. So a lot of people, who are on hospice care, end-of-life care, like their appetite goes, their energy level goes, their engagement they're not interested in engaging, they're depressed, they're scared, they're anxious. There are so many things happening at the end of life that cannabis can touch almost all of them at the same time. And so to be able to not only offer that as a benefit, as an option, but to also be able to get it to them in time that they have quality of life is like of so much importance. But again, we run into the same issue that hospice is a Medicare benefit. Now, the thing is, like, by the time Medicare found out, it's probably going to be a non-issue. Wow. However, I am seeing more patients, choosing to medicate with cannabis. Mm-hmm. And again, I haven't really seen anything where people were kicked off hospice for cannabis use. It usually is implemented in their regimen, and it just gives them quality for their last
they're not smoking it. We've heard the stories occasionally of security guards kicking out cancer patients for allegedly smoking and smelling it. We found that with Mom. The drops are subtle. Oh, yeah. They're easy to administer by the family, and pretty much the staff is on board.
Mm-hmm. People are dying.
Yeah.
Really, you're trying to make people comfortable.
Mm-hmm. I remember we had a cancer patient who wanted to get her card. She was actively dying, was considering hospice at the time. Mm-hmm. They called CannaHealth because they wanted to see if, we could get her card. Now, on average, it takes about 30 to 45 days after you get certified to get your card.
Has to be approved by the board, right?
Exactly. But we were able to expedite this woman's certification, her card, and she got it within, I want to say, 3 or 4 days. We just had to send to the state that she was a terminal patient, and she got it in 3 or 4 days and was able to medicate and had a good transitional experience. So for her and her family, I hope they passed it around like in all this kind of.
Yeah, it's life-changing. When my mom was dying, I was putting together a book of how cannabis helps dementia, all the studies from PubMed. And I came across one that showed that CBD helps morphine work better, in medical words that I don't know.
Yeah, they have a synergistic effect.
That's it. That's the medical word.
Amazing. So I put 2 drops between her gum and her lip, and I rubbed it in because she had a really bad death rattle. Like, it was really bad. She died of aspiration pneumonia. So it was really bad. And 2 drops, though, turned that rattle into just like the ocean's roar, just slow, smooth, easy. So cannabis really does help.
You mentioned CannaHealth, which of course is your company and your education platform, and your how do people, this is very special knowledge for people to know this, to have practitioners around in their state. How can people get a hold of you? Tell us a little bit about CannaHealth, and do you do cross-state consultation, or you just stick to Connecticut?
So right now we're only in Connecticut. So CannaHealth is a medical cannabis clinic, a set of medical cannabis clinics. We're here in Connecticut primarily now, but we are looking to move out of state, not just to care for patients, but to have brick and mortars or telehealth. Who knows what 2021 will bring.
Right.
But we use a nursing model. So everyone who works for us is either an APRN or a registered nurse, could do education, or we have CNAs and medical assistants as the receptionists and the patient engagement people. And we certify people with any of the qualifying conditions in Connecticut, but we also assess and diagnose people with PTSD. So that's the majority. What we see is probably the number one diagnosis is people are that people come in to get diagnosed with PTSD. And it's a quick process. They come in, they're seen, they can come back for more education. We provide education for the community and do a lot of outreach. We support a lot of programs in Connecticut. I volunteer on the Juvenile Review Board here and do a lot of give back to kind of like get people's attention to what is going on in the world, specifically in the world of cannabis.
Keebra Smith-Bolden, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure.
We hope to chat with you again in the future, maybe when you have some more dementia patients.
Okay.
Yeah, keep an eye out. Keep an eye out. Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard to break that stigma, to get people to try it.
And get it on the list. I mean, come on. Even in Texas, it's on the list for CBD. CBD, for Alzheimer's. So
yeah, Alzheimer's is on the list.
Yeah, so we need to break through these lists. They're ridiculous anyway. But that's the game they want to play, and we have to fight it and make sure they know that cannabis helps dementia. So thank you so much for joining us.
I can't wait to share this and and I love what you're doing with the podcast. Thank you for educating us.
Thanks for joining us for Cannabis Helps Dementia. Be sure to download, rate, and review us on iTunes or your favorite podcasting network.
And please share this podcast with anyone you know in relationship with dementia.
Do you want to tell your story of how cannabis helps dementia? Leave us a voice message at anchor.fm/Cannabis Helps Dementia. Or you can drop us a note or connect with us on the socials.
Check out the Society of Cannabis Clinicians website to find real medical professionals familiar with cannabis medicine in your area or online.
Because you remember, we're not doctors, just family caregivers turned advocates.
And don't forget, download, like, and share what you learned. Cannabis helps dementia.
Why don't you get wise? Get up and get out. Get rid of that frown that's been dragging you down, and get up in the air. Just pretend that you can fly. You'll never know if you can till you try. So get out of your rut, be able and strong. Give vent to that intent you've had pent up for so long. Come on up and see what it's like being out where you're free. Just do something that's real unique, do something that's new.